everyone. I'm John Ragsdale. I will be one of your professors for RNRS 396. I come at this as a theologian, not as a nurse, although I have been married to a nurse. My wife Sue and I have been married for 37, almost 38 years, but I'm not nursing faculty. I'm theology faculty. And so as I approach the work that we're going to do in this class over the course of this next 8 weeks, I do that with a theological lens on. I don't have a nursing lens on, and that sometimes makes things difficult for you and difficult for me. Here's what I mean. Theologians are really comfortable with considering ideas without a roadmap toward right and wrong. Conversation is as important as conclusion. That's a phrase I just made up, and I think it's actually a pretty good one. I think it helps to describe what it is that we do in philosophy, theology, literature, history, those humanities divisions of academic exercise. But with theologians, we are really comfortable in that space. What I have found, because this is not the first time I've taught this course, nor the first time I've had occasion to talk to nurses, of course, about what it is that I do. What I found is that that kind of approach sometimes is uncomfortable for nurses because, as my wife tells me, we are trained to get to the right diagnosis, to get to the right thing. If we can get to the right diagnosis and we have the right answer for that diagnosis, then we can bring the patient toward health and wholeness. But that's not really how theology works very often. Theology is a conversation. It's an ongoing conversation. If you come from a Christian perspective, it's a conversation that's been going on for 2,000 years. If you come from a Jewish perspective, it's a conversation that's been going on at least 3,500 years, maybe more like 4,500 years. If you come from a Hindu perspective, well, it's even longer yet, right? If you come from no theological perspective, then the way in which it's uncomfortable for you is that I talk about matters of faith, I talk about matters of spirituality, I talk about things that are deeply meaningful to me and deeply meaningful to the enterprise, the academic enterprise of the study of theology, spirituality, ethics, those kinds of things. But there can be a disconnect. What becomes uncomfortable for me sometimes is that I just want students to enjoy the conversation and not necessarily to be concerned about having the right answer. Now, I have opinions. I have opinions about the text, but I recognize that my opinions are the kinds of things that I hold loosely. There's some things I believe 90%, and there's some things I believe 51%. And so that's just kind of how we do things. And so when nursing students want to force me, maybe not force me, maybe that's not the right word, but push me toward, a right answer, that's not something that I spend a lot of time doing. And so it can be sometimes uncomfortable for me to just say, why don't they just enjoy the conversation? Because that's what I want for you. So having laid out that kind of groundwork, let me do a little bit more personal introduction. And I look forward to an opportunity over the next 8 weeks to get to know you mainly electronically, but to get to know you and experience life with you a little bit over the next 8 weeks. But let me say one other thing before I talk a little bit more about myself, which is not something I'm totally comfortable with, but it's something that we need to do, right? And that is that I just forgot what I was going to say. Hold on just a second. Nope, it's gone. I'll probably think of it. I normally do, and I'll come back to it, or I'll post a follow-up video on that. So back to the introduction about me. As I mentioned earlier, I'm married to Sue. Sue has been an RN since 1995, so 23 years. We have been married since 1980, so she was an adult student when she even began nursing. I think she was 30 or 31 when she started nursing school. We have been married 38 years in September. We have 2 children, Joshua and Megan, and they're both in their 30s, which is really hard for me to believe, especially as you can see when I am so young. We have 3 grandchildren, Presley, Mick, and Kyla, and they right now are 7. Mick will be 5 in August, and 4. And they're back in the Midwest. We're here in California, obviously. And we love those little guys, but we just don't get to see them as much as we did when we were in the Midwest, which was as little as a year ago at this time. So academically, I hold a PhD from Marquette University, which is one of the Jesuit schools. It's in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I had a wonderful experience. In fact, our whole family had a wonderful experience in Wisconsin and in Milwaukee. Was curious to us that we would like Milwaukee as much as we do, but we really do enjoy Milwaukee. Maybe it's because we're from St. Louis, and St. Louis is an old beer town, and Milwaukee's an old beer town, and it kind of dominates some of the culture of Milwaukee. Maybe it's that. I don't know. Maybe it's the friendships that we made. There were so many wonderful friends that we made in Wisconsin, but whatever the case, enjoyed my time at Marquette. I did a PhD in theology with a focus on Scripture, particularly Hebrew Bible. I wrote my dissertation on the Spirit in Judges and 1 Samuel, although I looked at other texts as well. But I am a lifelong Pentecostal Christian, and if you know anything about Pentecostalism, if you don't, I'm about to tell you, Pentecostalism is very much concerned with the Spirit. Why? Because in Acts chapter 2 in the New Testament, and we'll probably talk a bit in the course of this next 8 weeks about the book of Acts, but in Acts chapter 2, the Spirit descends upon the church, and the church is launched in the power of the Spirit, and that happened on the Feast of Pentecost in the first century. In the first century. So in any event, I'm a Pentecostal Christian. Pentecostals very much like to talk about the Spirit, so it was kind of natural for me when it came time to write my dissertation to find something, carve out an area of study on the Spirit. I continue to write on the Spirit now. I'm not so active in terms of publication. I do more presentations, academic presentations, and also pastoral presentations, and I talk about the Spirit quite a lot. In terms of my academic interest, excuse me, I do, just that kind of regular biblical studies kind of publication that you would see in a journal or in a commentary on the Bible. I'm interested in those kinds of things. An area that has become really interesting to me in the last 2 or 3 years, when I became aware of the American Presidency Project that is sponsored by the University of California, Santa Barbara, I became interested in how politicians, particularly presidents, use the Scriptures. And so I've written a little bit there, and I've got a couple of other writing projects on how presidents use the Scriptures that I've been tinkering with and need to bring to completion, that's for sure. I am very much interested both academically and then also vocationally in the theological education of ministers. This means this is really important to me. It is a sense of calling. It is a sense of mission for me, and so I'm interested in that and work on that in addition to what I do here with you. And then finally, I haven't done as much with this as I want to, but I'm really interested in homiletics, which is preaching. I'm interested in theories of preaching and how one preaches and cultural context for preaching, those kinds of things. So those are some introductory comments related to my family, related to my education and research interest, and we'll be back with some other things in just a moment.